The biggest aha moment in my life was when I realized that there's a name for this. There's a name for what I'm going through, what I've been through, and the name is narcissistic abuse. As soon as I learned that, I really just kind of became obsessed with trying to understand what this is, what narcissistic abuse is. And that really was the beginning of the journey for me to achieve a sense of clarity and ultimately step out of the relationship and begin healing. For this course, that's where I want to start, is just to have a real basic understanding of what narcissistic abuse is, what narcissistic personality disorder is, and the cluster Bs and what kind of makes them similar. So that's where I want to start in this course, is to give you a really good understanding of what narcissistic abuse is so that you can start to see it as it's happening to you. You can depersonalize the effects of it, as Dr. Ramani's book says, and I'm going to probably quote Dr. Ramani a lot because she's a huge mentor in the subject, but it has just helped me immensely with her videos and her books. But that it's not you. So once you understand there's a pattern to this abuse and it really looks the same no matter who the narcissist is in contact with, you can really start to step back and say, hey, it's not me. This is them. And that's the point where you can really gain clarity and conscious control. So what is narcissistic abuse? Let's look at a basic definition to start with. Narcissistic abuse is a form of emotional and psychological manipulation where the abuser seeks to control their victim to extract emotional, physical, or material resources. And this control is often exerted covertly, meaning behind the scenes. So you're not quite sure what's happening to you. It's not like you signed a contract that said, yes, I sign up for this. You're kind of being manipulated into it. So the control is often exerted covertly through tactics like the cycles of idealization and devaluation, which we're going to expand upon in the next module. Gaslighting, false accusations, isolation, and feigned victimhood. So these are some of the tactics that the abuser uses to control you. And they're controlling you for emotional, physical, or material resources, or all three. These relationships are typically erratic and emotionally draining and chaotic. And the chaos and the manipulation really leads you to lose your sense of self and ironically become dependent on the narcissist because you really have handed over your identity to them in the midst of the chaos and the confusion. So these dynamics can occur in any type of relationship. Romantic, familial, professional, or platonic. Narcissists often appear charming and charismatic in public, which adds to the victim's confusion and isolation. So that's a basic definition. And I think the one thing I want to make clear is it's more than just selfishness. So we think of narcissistic as a very selfish, self-ish, self-oriented person, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is pathological narcissism. It's a way of seeing the world and seeing other people that's quite different than you and I. So it's more than just selfishness. We all have narcissistic traits. We need narcissistic traits. So there are positive narcissistic traits like self-confidence and being proud of your accomplishments, having a sense of purpose and kind of going after it in the world. Those are all great things that we want to have. That would be healthy narcissism. And then there's even people that might be a little high on the narcissism scale where it's not exactly healthy narcissism. They may be, really into themselves, might be hard for them to apologize. They may like to control situations. Hello. These are all narcissistic tendencies as well, but it's not narcissistic personality disorder. And so narcissistic personality disorder is all of these things we're talking about, all of these narcissistic traits, plus a deliberate pattern of behavior that's aimed at control in order to extract something from a person. And they do that by eroding a person's self-worth and autonomy. So unlike typical relationship dynamics where you may, run up against somebody or disagree or have a fight, but ultimately there's a mutual respect there and compromise occurs, the narcissistic abuse centers only on the abuser's need for power and control. So narcissistic abuse is a form of emotional and psychological control. And the narcissistic traits that kind of are at the center of that is a grandiose sense of self-importance and really a need for admiration, a sense of entitlement, and a lack of empathy for other people. So the narcissist really only sees themselves and their own needs, which are insatiable, can't be filled. They can't see hurting other people. They can't see others' needs. So unlike general conflict in a relationship or like an occasional hurtful remark or fight, narcissistic abuse is systemic. It's the baseline. It's the foundation upon which the relationship is founded upon. So the other main characteristic of narcissistic abuse is the 4-stage abuse cycle, and we're going to get more into that into the next module. This is the cycle of abuse, cycle of narcissistic abuse, and that is idealization. So that's this phase where you're just perfect, and the abuser really mirrors you, your dreams and values, and they create this really larger than life bond. That's the idealization phase. Stage 2 with the narcissist is devaluation, where that kind of narcissistic mask slips, and then they start to devalue you. They start to become more contemptuous, and you kind of blame yourself. You don't know why things have shifted. Generally, you don't know why you're being devalued. Something has occurred with the narcissist where you're not idealized anymore. Now you must be devalued. And then the 3rd stage is discard, where you're suddenly irrelevant. You're ghosted, replaced, publicly humiliated. The goal is to crush your sense of worth and reinforce the abuser's power. And then the 4th stage is hoovering. So when you start to heal, or maybe, enough time has gone by, the abuser starts to reel you back in with flattery, pity, maybe a crisis only you can solve, and maybe a fake apology. And then so the loop begins again. So this is the circular cycle of narcissistic abuse. This is the hamster wheel that the victim is on. And, some people call it the merry-go-round. So victims of narcissistic abuse, if you're here, you may have developed low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, complex PTSD. You internalize the abuser's narrative. So you become the bad guy. You become the problem that the abuser is accusing you to be. And you really live in a state of chronic stress. So if you're living in a state of chronic stress with someone, you really want to look at what is going on in that relationship if you had not had that issue before. Chronic stress will flood the nervous system. That could lead to headaches, sleep issues, digestive problems. And what makes the damage most unique is your erosion of self-trust. When your reality is constantly questioned by the narcissist, you really kind of learn to not trust yourself and become more susceptible for exploitation. So Dr. Sam Vaknin, a self-professed narcissist and also expert on narcissistic personality disorder, he says the narcissist requires the 4 S's from their intimate partner. So that's sex, supply, sadistic or narcissistic services, and safety. And depending on what the nature of the relationship is, there may be 2 out of 4 of those that are being fulfilled or being looked for, exploited from the victim. I think you can really pare it down to the supply, which we'll get to later, that the narcissist is really looking for narcissistic supply. And that really just amounts to your emotional energy, positive or negative. So what is narcissistic personality disorder? I'm going to read the DSM criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're not diagnosing anyone. We're really just looking at the effects of this relationship on you. But this is just something to keep in mind. So this is how it's diagnosed. Most narcissistic people won't go get diagnosed. So that's why there's no real clear understanding of how many people have this disorder. But if you were to be diagnosed, they were looking for 5 or more of the following. And this is for narcissistic personality disorder. Has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, and expects to be recognized as superior at all times. Is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood or should associate with other special or high status people, although they will make exceptions for their victims or targets and elevate them to that high status so they can exploit them. Requires excessive admiration or else. Has a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance. Is interpersonally exploitative. Takes advantage of others to achieve his or her ends. That's a big one. Lacks empathy. Is unwilling, or I say unable, to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, only their own needs. And is envious, often envious of others, or believes that others are envious of him or her. So if you criticize them or walk away, they may accuse you of being envious of them. And lastly, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We're not trying to diagnose anyone, but that's how people are diagnosed with 5 or more of those. And also a little note on borderline personality disorder. So borderline is not always narcissistic, but very frequently it is. So you could think of the one of the main differences between narcissistic and borderline personality disorder is that the narcissist has a very developed false self, a grandiose false self, and the borderline really feels pretty scared and empty inside. They have a deep fear of abandonment. So they live a very fearful life. I mean, they both do. That's why I think they overlap quite a bit. So there's going to be difference. The borderline's more concerned with abandonment. The narcissist is more concerned with appearance and superiority, but really they overlap in the ways that they manipulate and control others for their needs that are really impossible to supply. So that's a little bit on that. Now, the basic problem of a survivor, and this is also another good reason to talk about what this disorder is and how it looks and how it shows up and really the pervasiveness of it and that it's incurable. It can be worked on a little bit, but you could think of it as a rubber band. It's a personality disorder. You can stretch the rubber band and you can help with some of the symptoms and the behaviors, but really the rubber band's just going to go back. I mean, if you're not on it every day, every second of the day, it just goes back to where it was. So you can think of it as that kind of rubber band. That's a personality disorder. It's incurable. So the problem of the survivor is their inability to get their level of expectation equal to the level of the partner's disorder. And I'm sure if you're here, you recognize that. So what that means is kind of that false hope that you keep within the relationship because you love them. Most of the time you do love that person and you're capable of a type of love that they're not capable of. So you really want to believe they can change and they might be telling you that they can change. And that is really where you get stuck. So part of this work is to understand that this is an incurable disorder and that it's not going to change. So that's another thing that Dr. Ramani calls radical acceptance. So radical acceptance is really important. And so again, with that, unchanging, very rigid, disordered personality, you're going to experience a feeling of Groundhog's Day in this relationship, the merry-go-round or the maze, like I said in the intro video. So this disorder really feels like, the individual is just doing the same thing over and over again, really irrespective of the appropriateness of the behavior or the negative consequences they're creating for themselves. They're just going to keep doing it. And so you're the one that's going to be forgiving them and allowing this cycle to perpetuate. And so that is another reason to do this work because you're going to have to be the one that steps off the merry-go-round. They're not going to stop it. And also you're going to be looking at, again, dramatic and erratic behavior, very emotional. These relationships are very emotional. And the survivor or the victim typically has all of the typical trauma symptoms. So you really develop trauma symptoms from being in these relationships. So enduring or persistent pattern inflexibility in the dysfunction, pervasive across almost all situations with their victims, that rubber band feeling, it always goes back, and considerable personal and social problems. These people have considerable personal and social problems, very disordered life. If they meet a new person that becomes new supply for them, it'll be the same game. Blame, project, rationalize, new problem repeats. So they don't have the capacity to self-monitor or self-correct. So yeah, the last little bit I want to talk about here is narcissistic supply, and that's you. So if you're here as the survivor or the victim or target of a narcissistic person, you are their supply. And this is a really big concept to internalize at this point. And we're going to talk about this more in another module. But narcissistic supply is your energy. That's what they're feeding off of. And so it can be emotional, positive or negative. It doesn't matter. And when you're in the cycle, it will be both at different times. So again, that's that hamster wheel. So the supply is your energy, and the energy could be in the form of emotions, it can be in the form of money. It can be in the form of sex, your connections, doing work for the narcissist, whatever the narcissist needs at that moment. They're kind of like a heat-seeking missile, and they will find you. And if you are vulnerable to this, you will become trapped in the cycle. So what we want to do is we want to ultimately start cutting off that supply for the narcissist. So cutting off their supply that they're getting from you so that you can move back into yourself. You can reclaim yourself and then start reorganizing that beautiful life energy for your own health and healing. Okay, so that is a basic overview of narcissistic abuse and narcissistic personality disorder. I encourage you to keep doing research on this if you want to look into any of these things more deeply, and check out the next video, which we're going to go deeper into the cycles of narcissistic abuse. And that's idealization, devaluation, discard, and hoovering. So I'll see you there.